Welcome to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours, virtually.
We're coming to you from gardenatozz.org. I'm Janet McConovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola.
And we are bringing this material to our friends and those of us who read our website because we think that this is the best way to learn, is to share information that comes straight from the garden. And we're giving a hearty howdy today to special guests because we've opened this webinar up to whoever wants to be here. We don't know how many people that may end up being.
Some may get kicked off if we go past our limit, but I can't even remember what our limit is.
I think we're okay.
We're good.
But we did invite people in because we're going to post this webinar on our public YouTube channel because it fits in as the part 2 kind of, or the summer part of our spring too big, too much webinar. So we thought we might just as well invite some people in, and those of you who are new, hang in there because we're all fairly new at all of this technology.
Yes,
every week
we're still
something
learning.
new. So today we're talking about pruning evergreens, shrubs, and trees. We're reversed there. So
I'm the one with the camera on that side.
And I've been wearing my suspenders to hold my pants up, my work pants up, for about 35 years now. We've written a lot about gardening because our work is gardening professionally, but we can't do that in the wintertime. And we are writers and educators from our past life. So we've written a lot of things on our website and in newspaper, magazines. When we're not writing, we're enjoying what we're doing.
We've got to enjoy it.
Yeah, we
wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy it.
Even in today's environment where things are very difficult for getting around. There is a chapter in our book, Caring for Perennials, about pruning, but we'll have to work on an entire pruning book to get all the information that we've gotten over the years into it. And despite the fact that Steve will often demur to me and say, no, Janet will tell you about that, he too can prune. The article, Stephen Prunes False Cypresses, on the left, you cannot really tell from that picture because there's no person in the picture with it, but he brought that false cypress down by 5 feet. Yep. And in by 3.5 to 4 feet all the way around. The false cypress itself is 15 feet tall?
It was 15 to 18 then.
Yeah. So he's also able.
I can do things.
And today we have another special guest. Ann Crimmins is with us. Ann, who might wonder where the picture came from. This is from our Detroit Zoo volunteer group. We were making a boulder wall that day. It was a long time ago.
Wow, I was young.
And so were some of us.
Yeah, and yep.
We still are, Ann.
And moving all those rocks got us here to where we are today, didn't it, Ann? And Ann is quite the learner, too. This is at one of our tool sharpening parties where Dawn is demonstrating how to properly, lop or shear someone. But Ann has been our friend for a long time, and because today our daughter, Sonia Nicola, who's been our co-host and our assistant, to make sure that when we have questions coming in on chat, she keeps track that they're there, so when we get the question and answer session, somebody can say, hey, let me read you a question. So Ann has agreed to help out today, and she is technically more adept than a whole lot of us too, so you might want to ask Ann on the chat window if you're having problems as we go along, because Ann might be able to help you out there. That's Sonia. She did tell me when she said that she wasn't going to come here that, well, maybe she'd come incognito. So I found an incognito picture as Steve's Gimli and my Eowyn and Sonia's Galadriel there.
For those of you who know Lord of the Rings, those of you who don't, we were just in costume.
We're going to work on today's material in 3 parts. Chapter 1, we're going to talk about the basic summer cut and the evergreens, call it the rules or the guidelines. We'll move on to chapter 3 and then chapter 2, because we are pretty sure that chapter 3 is where you, most of you, want to talk. And what happened with us? Excuse me?
Oh, that was somebody.
Okay. What happens with us, Stephen and me, is that we mean to have enough time for the 3rd question and answer in the 3rd session. And
we don't.
So we moved chapter 2 into the end. That will make more sense. You need to give me control of the screen again.
Oh, sorry.
Stephen. Okay, so you can get the webinar guide at our website on the webinar audience notes page. You have to give me back control of my screen. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start out with throwing out any attachment to rules that you've got and throw out any attachment to plant categories. We've heard lots of rules from people at various times that say you have to do this at this time, you have to do this in this way. We have also, in our experience in watching how things work, seen everyone do everything at all times, and in most cases without you need to find that.
I'm trying to. I was trying to.
Without a bad result, really. So throw out those rules. They don't apply anymore. And do throw out categories. Yeah, I think we do have a camera on.
We have a camera on that I can't find it. There it is.
There it is. There you go. Stop video. There you go. Okay, back to my screen.
Okay, you got. I was not able to turn it off. Just so you know.
We found it.
Okay, that's not good.
Thank you, though.
That's the way that goes.
You got to go back.
Okay, I got to go back. So
okay,
anything goes anytime. And shrubs can be trees. Trees can be a conifer and not actually a tree type thing. Evergreens are not always evergreen, depending on what part of the world you're in and how you treat things. So we tell people that not to unsettle you, but to tell you that there are some basics to follow that help us out in this kind of unsteady, everything shifting world, and we're going to tell you what those things are. And because in summer we focus on restricting the size of plants, that's today's main pruning topic.
Keeping them small.
It is the main reason that people prune, is to keep things small anyway, but summer is a particularly good time to do that, which we'll get back to later. So anything goes. Those are white pine trees, blue spruce trees, yews.
I think there's a juniper or arborvitae.
Yes,
in there
there's junipers
too.
and arborvitaes, and those are 100 at the time that Stephen took this picture, 150 years old. So despite the fact that people would tell you can't turn a tree into a Dr. Seuss tree, you can, and you can keep it that way quite a long time. This is a pleached hedge of linden trees that's pruned once a year to keep it that size. Otherwise, those linden trees would be, let me see, I think the one at Jack's is 65 feet tall.
Yeah, they get big.
So restricting size is the reason that most people want to prune anyway, and it's the thing we're doing right now, so we're starting with that. And fortunately, almost any plant can be kept small. What makes the difference is growth rate. And something that you need to figure out is growth rate, because it drives the difficulty, the amount of work you have to do, and how often you have to do that work.
How fast does it grow?
Yeah.
And on plants, on some woody plants, you could look at the change in the twig and bark color.
Right. That this year's growth is a different color because it hasn't formed bark yet. If you look at the green, it's very obvious on that box elder that the green is new growth. The brown behind it is bark forming on last year's growth. And if you go back even further than that, you can see the bark gets thicker in 2 years ago. So you can look and say, well, look, it grew this much. If I know how much it grows, I know how much to cut it in order to keep it to a particular size. This is a yew branch. This is a typical yew branch. This one came from a ward-eye yew, but those are our hybrid yews that most people have in front of their houses. They have spreaders, or they have round ones, or pyramidal ones. Well, the pyramidal one is a different species. At any rate, if you look at the tips there, you're looking at, about 8 inches of growth at the top, 8 to 12 inches of growth at the top. That's in the second push, and that's still very green and very soft. And behind it, all of that white wood or tan colored wood, light honey colored wood, grew this spring. So you're looking at quite a growth rate on a yew.
Vigorous.
And means that we have to cut it quite a bit. And you can also look for a change, a scar that circles the bottom of a stem. The scar at the bottom of this bottle brush buckeye goes all the way around the twig. That's called a terminal bud scar. It means that a bud was sitting at the terminal or tip of that branch.
And it does, when it does scar, and you could go from scar to scar and tell the growth rate and how old plants are.
Yeah, often for many years, you can take one of your maple trees, for instance, and trace the scars back for 5 or 6 or 7 years before the bark gets thick enough to hide them. And you can watch and say, well, this year it grew a foot. Last year it grew 2 feet. What's the difference between this year and last year?
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Why is it growing more now?
On an arborvitae, this is an arborvitae twig that you're looking at, and that is a twig. A lot of people think that that's a leaf, but that's a twig, that yellowish green part, and above it is this year's growth. The newest growth is green, and the little bumps are the leaves. The whole arrangement there, that is a twig, and the little bumps on it are the leaves, and that's this year. Last year is beginning to get bark. You can see the brown on it, and further down there's more. And some plants have a much faster growth and are harder to keep under control. These are green giant arborvitae. One of our clients put these in, and she's very pleased with them and very proud of them. I actually begged her not to put them in because they grow so fast, and she wanted a hedge right away.
Right. It provided.
Yeah, you're looking at the right hand, on the right hand picture, you're looking at 1 year's growth at the far right side. That's 1 year's growth at the top of one of those arborvitaes. And the second year, it grew a little less far at the top because it's growing more side branches, but they're still prodigious growers. That's all 1 year's growth up there. So in cutting that hedge back, I cut the top back. And also, if you look at the edge of the driveway, the before picture on the left, shows that the arborvitaes are reaching the edge of the driveway. On the right, I've cut the sides back as well as the top because they're growing on the sides. Generally, they don't grow as much on the sides and the bottom as they do on the top. That's how plants know to keep growing up. But you still need to look and say, I have to cut.
And you also prune to make sure light keeps going down to the bottom all the way. Otherwise, it's going to thin out at the bottom. If sometimes they prune straight up and down when they're even as keeping it small, and wonder why they lost the branches.
We'll do that a little bit later.
Oh, sorry.
So it might not look like on the bottom picture that's after that much has happened there. But if you look at the trunk of the tree that the blue arrow is pointing to, you'll see that you can see about 4 more feet of trunk there. And the American Conifer Society is very, very good to put up on their website the growth rates of conifers, because it's one of the things that throws people off. They say, well, I thought it was a dwarf. Well, a dwarf, D in the Conifer Society category, means it grows 1 to 6 inches a year. And it means that in 10 years' time, it might be 6 feet tall. So it does grow. It just because it's a dwarf doesn't mean that it is going to stay tiny forever. So you might want to take a look at some of these things and look into it.
The dwarf of a 100-foot tree
Right.
can still get pretty big.
Yeah, so you can look at it after it's been growing in your yard, but you can also look it up before you plant it and say, how big does this thing get? And when it comes to restricting size, some species of plants are suited to tight pruning and making them into a shape, where others are not so. Boxwood, for instance, most people would know boxwood or yew as shrubs that get hedged a lot and turned into fanciful shapes. Bird's nest spruce is not a plant that takes well to shearing.
It doesn't like
this
that.
one had been sheared repeatedly for a little over 12 years until the plant couldn't grow anymore, couldn't produce any more new leaves on the old wood. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and began to look like this. We were able to salvage that one. I cut off all of the dead, and it will grow back in, if you can show them the end branches that will grow out and in. So all of these branches that are there, those will now grow and fill in that space in time. But you have to say this species is not so well suited to being hedged and cut. That same variety, bird's nest spruce, is here on the left. A piece got broken. I've forgotten exactly how it broke, and I cut out the part. You can see a hole on the left side, a dark area. By the next year, that dark area is filling in because it's growing quite vigorously, but it wouldn't work that way year after year after year. And I wonder if Diane, I forgot Diane, whether we ever finished this. As we were putting this together, I realized we should be telling people some of the practical things that have served us well. One of the things that served us very well that we learned at the Niagara Falls School of Horticulture from the gardeners is always when you prune, beat the bushes first.
Oh, yeah. Find out if there's bees.
Yeah, take a rake, backside of a rake, and tap your way along the hedge. Find the bees before you put your face into them, because we pruned part of this hedge. This is a hedge of bird's nest spruce in front of Diane's house. And right there we ran into the yellow jackets that were in there. So I'm
Right
not sure they were on the top backside actually. So I had just pruned there. So you can see, if you look at the right, what have been pruned, and then look at the left, the ones that haven't been pruned, you can see that you can prune them so that they still look natural. And that's what we want to tell people to do.
It's the shearing, that continuous shearing, that hurts it.
Okay, now it has the simplest directions. And we've covered this before, so forgive us for repeating ourselves, but the directions are: let the plant grow to the desired height and width. And once a year, once it gets to the limit, remove all the growth beyond the limit. And that means you have to learn to distinguish between current wood and old. And you can either shear to do that, or you can selectively cut, as I did on those bird's nest spruce. It's your choice.
You may end up doing both.
Right. So when it gets to your limit, there's my line, the dotted line. You go, hop, nope, you can't do that. You could reach in and take branches out, bringing everything down to that line. Or you could shear and take them off. But either way, you need to reach in, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We take 20% of the twigs, maybe 1 out of 5 twigs of the thickest twigs we take out. But we'll get into that in detail. That's called thinning, taking branches out deeper than your outline. Shearing is indiscriminate cutting at a line. So shearing. Right across the top of that U. Now, once you do that U, right where you cut through, 5 or 6 different little branch twigs all at once, you got one thick one and a bunch of little ones, every one of those that you cut is now going to form a bud at its tip. And next year, you're going to get 2 and 3 times as many twigs right at that point.
Be sprouting.
Yeah. And it's going to become very thick, as it already has there.
You can see the thickness.
Yeah. The thinning would reach back in and take part of that out.
We will
grab that thick twig and clip it back further.
Maybe down into here.
Mm-hmm. So shearing this privet hedge caused it to branch right where you see there. And if you shear at that same point all the time, you'll get the same thing. But most people don't. They let the plants keep growing, because every year they shear the softer stuff, and it grows 1 inch or 2 inches.
Somebody sheared here, and then they sheared here.
And next year,
now they're going to shear up here and wonder, why is it? I don't remember having to do that.
This was a former neighbor, a neighbor of ours at our other house, who asked me, could you do something about this bush? I said, well, here's what's happened. You let it get ahead of you. So you let it grow to your height and limit, and then cut everything that grows behind the line. And then you have to make sure that you cut more. You do those thinning cuts. You're going to clip the stubs off, the thickest parts. And it amounts to usually 1 out of 5 or 6 branches you're going to take out. And it keeps it from becoming like this hollow ball look.
And it really does. If you look inside, there's very few buds going out into the inside. All the buds are facing outside, and it's denser,
on the outside. Dense. And it's unhealthy for the plant, because it keeps getting its newest growth cut and cut and cut. And that's its best energy. On the inside, the branches time out. They're shaded by all that dense stuff on the outside.
They have no green.
You build up dead wood on the inside, and it just doesn't look as attractive. People say, how can I get it to be thicker? You can get it to be thicker by thinning the top. Let light come through the top of that red twig dogwood. Don't just keep shearing the top. Don't have it so
dense.
So here, when we clip this U every year, and we clip this one every year or every 2 years at a client's house. Actually, we have quite a few of them. By this time, the branches that grew, and all of the dark green that you see by Steve's pointer, that's all grew in the spring. And then long about July, we get a second push of growth, boom, from the tallest branch that took off. Well, we want to get rid of that, but we're not just going to shear that. We're going to reach in and take the thick part behind, right there. We're going to clip that all the way back to there, as well as clip it where it's softer. And that way we keep that feathery outline, and we keep light reaching into that stuff way down to the right. See those little branches way down to the right? If they get light, they keep growing and become the next candidate and the next candidate and the next candidate to reach the outside. If they don't get light, they start dying back, and you get dead twigs inside the plant. That's why those dead branches are back there.
And the plant gets weaker.
And it gets weaker. Now it's creating less leaves, and it's just been repeatedly sheared until the plant itself is quite weak.
And if you've been shearing and you get deer on top of it, you might not have a U much longer.
Yeah.
I mean.
So you get a lot of dead wood built up on the inside, and that wood is non-productive wood. It's wood that needs energy and doesn't have enough leaves to give it energy. What you want is something like this. The arborvitae on the left, this is a topiary arborvitae, one of those poodle clipped deals. I prune it once a year.
Sorry.
I've pruned the one on the left. I have not yet given the annual clipping to the one on the right. So you can see that what I've lost is the shag. What I took off is on the left. That's what I sheared off in the bucket. On the right are the clippings I took out when I thinned.
See the dense, harder pieces.
And you can see that they're 3-4 inches long. I reached in and clipped back further to keep them done. So it's same thing here on this U. After you sheared the top, you would go in and you can see a thick one right there. Yeah. You would feel that when you patted the top. I literally just open palm pat.
Ow.
And find the ones that resist.
I do it too hard.
And reach in and cut them back. Okay. You do need to recognize needle retention period for evergreens. How long is that part going to stay green? If you're cutting back to something that's green and it's on its way to this year losing those needles,
that could be a problem.
Yeah. So pines, for instance, this is a mugo pine that I'm pointing to on the left. This mugo pine, the top part, the honey-colored wood at the very top of the screen, that's this year's growth, this year's needles. Below it, on that section right there, that's 2-year-old needles. Those are last year's needles. Down below my hand, those are 3-year-old needles. And today, this year, those 3-year-old needles are going to drop off because that's what the species does. On a blue spruce, there I'm using a rake to hold it open. The bluer stuff is the newer foliage, 1 and 2 years old, that still has a waxy coating on it. Further back are needles that formed on branches that formed 4 years ago and have lost the coating and are going to drop off and become the dead twigs that you see way back in there. So you want to know that you're cutting back to lively new growth. And some plants keep needles for a long time. The juniper on the lower right, junipers keep needles for 20 years, some of them.
Itchy buggers.
You can cut junipers way back as long as there's green on the branch, and they'll keep growing back out for you. So we gave you in the outline that you got today, we won't go over this in detail, just show you how to use it. We've got a foliage retention chart that tells you the species, how long their foliage lives, when it falls. People worry about.
Yeah. White pine's turning, why is my white pine so yellow?
Yeah.
And if it's on the inside, it's the old needles.
Right, if it's the old needles
It's
falling,
fall
in,
color.
It's fall. Yeah, same thing with arborvitae. So they fall continuously from a fir or a Douglas fir. I can tell you that our driveway is constantly covered. Our fir, our concolor fir, keeps its needles for about 4 years. And so you can read down there and see that. You'll see an asterisk in some of the charts for how long they keep it, and it's because people disagree. You'll have different people telling you different things. You'll also on this evergreen chart find some plants that you might not know. Most of us will know you keeping the needles for 3 to 5 years, and they continuously drop. They drop their needles, early in the year, in spring and early summer. But you may not grow Arizona cypress. Maybe you don't grow an Atlas blue cedar. This chart is meant for our friends that we have some in South Carolina, North Carolina, Oregon. So you've got things in different areas. They're not all hardy to our home ground in Michigan. Fall cypress, 5 years or more for fall cypress, and that's a fall cypress on the pictured on the right. You can see some brown on the inside. The entire branchlet, that's a branchlet, that's a branch, that's a twig, like on an arborvitae. And when it's its time, it falls off, which is nice because it's neater than a spruce that keeps all those little pretty things. But they can often build up inside the plant, and you need to shake, agitate the plant to get them out of there. Or our friend Dennis Groh, who grows incredibly beautiful conifers of all kinds, will often take a hose and hose them off forcefully to push that stuff out of there. That can build up and look awful.
It could, and it makes the plant look sick or something wrong with it, and it's just cosmetic.
And try to be realistic about how well a plant can regenerate, which means you need to know a little bit about wood to leaf balance. Wood can't, in most cases, wood can't photosynthesize, so it can't make energy. It relies on leaves to make it energy to keep all of its cell functions going. So in 2012, when I looked at this pyramidal U and said, okay, we've got to do something about this. This is ugly. This is an ugly, ugly, fat, chubby, hollow shell U that somebody's been shearing for 15 years.
And not properly,
right?
Because the bottom's dying out.
And I can't make it a better shape where it's not turned in on the bottom unless I take all the green off. I do notice that there's some greenery coming. So I took all of the dead off. You can see the stubs in various places on the trunk and out here to the left. You can see where I cut all the dead and some of the green off in order to let light get into the trunk to where there were a few little starts there on the left. And now on the right, later in the year, you can see more of them have come. So first I said, let me leave you some energy and cut you back a little bit so that then by the next year, this is what it looked like. And you can see a lot more growth coming on the way on the inside. So that was May of the year after I gave it a chance to change its balance of wood to leaf. So in June, I said, okay, and cut everything off. Poor little baby. And that's what it looked like in the, let's say that would be the third year. And what it looks like now. We just cut that.
Just
yesterday.
finished it.
Just trimmed that up yesterday. We trim it once a year.
Yep.
Okay, so you can prune to restrict growth at any time of the year. You really can. Anytime you want to, you can go out there and prune to restrict growth. But we recommend do it when the season's growth for the year is all set, which is now for most of us in the northern part of the country. Sometime in August, when the days start getting shorter and the nights start getting cooler, the plants stop pushing out new growth and start sealing up the shoot for next year. And when they do that, they stop responding to pruning by sending out new shoots. And
there's no new growth that comes out that can be damaged.
yeah, and they are already set themselves up. Their hierarchy for next year is set up already. The bud at the top knows it's the bud that's going to grow more than anybody else. And if you come along and cut it off, the buds down below who formed themselves knowing that they had a boss up above them don't know the boss is gone, and they grow more orderly the next spring. So August is a really good time to do that. You don't want to prune when it's wet. There are a few plants that it's okay to prune when it's wet because they don't get much in the way of leaf wood diseases, but you're best off to just avoid pruning when plants are wet.
Make sure it's dry. That includes dew in the morning. Wait for it to dry up.
Yeah, this is a sumac. Most people think of sumac as trash trees and they grow like weeds, but this is a canker. When the branch was young and still soft without bark, it got infected. It got infected by a fungus, and now that part is dead. The bark doesn't form there, and it's always going to be weak at that point.
And it's growing. Eventually, will girdle the plant or kill the twig.
Yep, it's a race every year. The fungus grows a little further. The branch grows a little bit further. Okay, and if you want to save yourself work, don't prune when the plant is in its liveliest growth periods. When it's expanding all of its shoots in the spring, or when it's dropping its leaves in the fall and growing roots like crazy, those are good times to not prune.
If you cut it then, it's just going to push out all new growth faster, right?
In the spring.
Yes, in the spring.
In the fall, you tend to starve the plant to a certain extent. So we want in the spring to cut the red twig dogwood right down to the ground, because we want all that lively growth. We want it to go whoosh and to come up, and all of the new growth to come up thick and be red for the next year.
Plus that makes great wattle. Yeah,
we use it for making wattle fences. But we would never do that to a 9-bark. In the background behind the juniper, you can see juniper in the foreground. There's several 9-barks in the back. You just do not want to prune hard on a 9-bark if you can help it. What you want to do is give them room to grow.
Know the species.
Know the species. Say you can have 10 feet. And then go in every year or a couple of years, and you can see that the growth that they're doing is spreading out. It's just laying on the ground. It's looking for places to grow and for light to reach out to. You're going to go in, and you literally go into the plant. You can see where the blue arrow is pointing to that branch laying out. That's it there. And you take it out. You just take the branch out. Now, when you first take it out and you drag it out of there, you'll turn around and look and go, oh my gosh, oh no, what have I done? Don't worry about it. Just continue to take out the branches that are going, that are oldest or that are most non-productive down on the ground.
Sometimes you have to put up with a little bit of quote unquote ugliness to get the beauty later.
Right, but this is 20 minutes later. I've now taken a couple of branches out of each of the 9-barks. And if you look, the before on the left and the after on the right, what I've done is let light come in to reach inside and keep growth on the inside. And I've taken them from rooting and growing out further than they were going to grow. Now that's if you've got room for 9-bark. We'll deal later in the program with if you don't have room for it. If it's already too big, the rules are cut it back hard and cut it back smaller than you want it to be so it has room to grow up to your limits again. And that might be easiest in the spring, which is you take your spirea when it starts getting where the blue arrow is pointing.
Early spring.
Yeah, the blue arrow is pointing there to where the branches have begun to get side branches that are so heavy that, like the 9 bark, it's dragging it down to the ground. And at that point, you say, early spring, before you leaf out, we're just going to cut you right off at ground level. And it grows back. There it is. That's the end of that year. Grown back, straight branches. You can see the flower buds at the seed pods at the top. So it bloomed and everything. But you get a neater growth that way. And we write these things up for people. We've got hundreds of articles about pruning on our website, including taking red twig dogwood and cutting it down in the spring. Be careful when you're pruning to preserve the grafts. I'm sorry that this is out of focus. It's my fault. I saw
Don't
it.
apologize.
Okay, don't apologize. This is a weeping cherry. It's a pink weeping cherry, but you will see that it has white blossoms on it. And if you follow those branches up, those branches that are blooming white are also growing upright, not weeping. Those branches are coming from the trunk, from one sucker that grew from below the graft and up to the top. And you need to cut that branch off and to make sure that the place where all those pink branches is attached, where they're grafted, that you don't someday cut that off.
Yep.
If you do, you're going to end up with a white upright cherry. You might lose your mature features, things like special, like the cones and the fruit, the foliage of different colors for a season or two if you cut something back hard, but well, that's the way it goes. Sometimes that happens. Need to keep in mind what I call PJ facts. Some plants can grow from dormant buds, so I can clip them back all the way to bare wood and they'll sprout out from there, and some won't. And I call pine, juniper, fir, arborvitae, the cypress group, and spruces the ones that you need to watch out for, depending on what part of the world.
PJ Facts. I thought there's no, never mind. There's a kid's comic.
Yeah,
cartoon.
So juniper, for instance, does not generate from bare wood. So when I cut this one, which had been sheared too much and the top is getting thick and it's shading out the bottom, so I've sheared it to what you see on the right. Well, I clipped it. I did that selectively. Inside, I cut back to those bits of greenery. Those will grow and become new branches, but they need to have light. And I had to clip back and take out dead stuff and disease stuff to get to them. Ugh, hate working with junipers. On an arborvitae, blue arrows are pointing to that's a twiglet. It's not a leaf. That's a collection of leaves. It's a small branch. And if you cut to just above there, that can develop into what you see on the right, that nice feathery thing. But if you cut to brown wood, it's not going to grow.
It won't come back.
Now, remember that everybody has a different idea of what's improving and making something beautiful. So when you're shaping, don't be upset if you see somebody's Japanese maple looking like what it looks like on the left. It's a Japanese maple on the right. It's a beautiful tree. But the same tree could be treated like you see on the left. And there's nothing wrong with any way that somebody wants to clip their plants.
It's their plant.
The only thing that I can say that's wrong about shaping is don't pull the bottom part in. The upper foliage must not shade the lower foliage on something that you're keeping in a shape like that's dense. So I've pruned that boxwood out to take out the pieces that have been becoming thick and to shape it so that it has light reaching the bottom branches. Remember when you're shaping things that wherever you leave a bud at the end of a branch, it will become dominant. It might not start out dominant, but it will. So that bush, the tip bud can grow 12 inches, but meanwhile the bud down the side branch is going to grow only 8 inches.
And they'll tend to grow in the direction they're going.
That's right. So if I cut this red bud branch back to a side branch, the new branch is going to take off in the direction of wherever that side branch is. So pick your place, say where you want it to go. This is where you get the notes about pruning your roses to an out-facing bud, because you'd like the rose to have a branch that goes outward gracefully, not crosses on itself. If you've got 2 buds, like on maples and the chestnut group, or chestnut and dogwoods, if you've got 2 buds and you only want 1 branch, but you've got 2 of them, pinch one of them off. Choose one.
Knock it off.
Yeah, knock it off. Nature will do it by itself. Here's those 2 buds grown, and you can see that one of them's gotten thicker and taller. because at some point during the year, it got in the race between those two. It got a little bit ahead of the other one, and then the chemicals start and boom, it takes off. So it's going to do it by itself, but you can direct it. Start pruning at the tallest parts and the widest parts of the plant. They are the fastest growing and the most limiting. The widest part is generally the part that has the thinnest foliage and tells you how far you can change things. So that's why I'm looking inside this spruce.
How far back can she go?
Yep, the bottom edge of a spruce is what tells me to make that line that leans inward. How far can I cut this? The top, you can usually cut a long way,
but you have to figure the whole line before you start, because there might not be as much growth as you think in some of these lower branches that will come back.
And you get weeping tips. Weepers can make things a little sticky. Evergreens can be literally sticky with sap, but I mean, it just gets to where you think, well, I don't know, let me see, who's the leader here? Cut, watch, and learn. So here's a weeping hemlock that's gotten out of hand. I said, no, we have to be able to get through this walkway with a pickup truck. So I have to cut you. And the dominant branch is the one that goes up furthest, but then it weeps over. Went up there and it's weeping over. So I'm cutting that branch back.
She had a pole pruner in her hand actually right then.
Did I really?
Yep.
No, those
are
just
those
loppers.
I thought it was pole pruner.
Yeah.
Shucks.
So I've selectively taken wood out. Now, I didn't shear it. I took wood out. So if you look, you couldn't see the gazebo before. I've cut that branch back to a side branch. You can see right through now. Looking from the inside out, the left is before, the right is back to the edge of the bed.
Sometimes if you look at it and observe, you could save yourself some work by cutting farther back and taking a whole bunch out rather than multiple cuts and then end up back to where you would have cut in the first place.
That's right. Don't cut a bunch of side branches if what you can do is cut back to a side branch further back. On weeping cherries, we have an article called Fast Growing Tree about the weeping cherry. It started out, as you see, on the left. And I said, oh, these weeping cherries, they can be so ugly. And we made it into what's on the right. And we keep it now at the size that you see on the lower right. Because we looked and said, which branches are dominant? We're going to cut those back to side branches. And we're going to take out all the weak crossing stuff and make it into a pretty plant. Timing can be important. If you do things after the season growth is finished in August or later, then there's not so much touch-up required. But if you want a vigorous growth, if you want something to sprout all over, spring. And there's a lot of old plants. Steve brought this picture from a Powys Castle in Wales. And those are close to 300 years old. Those yews. Yeah, prune once every 2 years.
And dense on the inside, surprisingly dense on the inside.
These are 25-year-old boxwoods, and that's September 2012 on the top left. On the bottom, in the middle, I cut them every 2 years. You see me cutting them. That's how much they grew. I'm cutting back to that same point. Can you see that I've shaved it and it's a half shell? So I prune these 2 years growth back so that I can only prune them. I only have to prune them every 2 years. I shear and then I thin. Shear on the left, thin in the middle. See, now you can see through in the middle there. And there's spaces in there. Don't worry about that. Step back. Greenery fills space at different levels. This is a three-dimensional plant. It doesn't have to have green at the outside level all the way around. This is a arborvitae that we cut every 2 years. And we cut it back. You have to look at the fence to see how much it's been cut back. It was at the fence and bulging through the fence on the left side. Now on the right side, we've got 7-8 inches back because I've cut it back by 2 years growth. And that's in an article we put in today. I'm not good at remembering to take pictures. The middle picture, I started pruning. So there's a chunk out of this arborvitae already. I started pruning before I realized, I should take a picture. On the left is 2016, the last time we pruned this arborvitae, and that's after I pruned it. On the right, in the middle, is this year before, almost before I started pruning, and then 2020 on the right. Now it's every 4 years, so we're going to see a little bit of brown, but as the owner says, better than pulling the thing out and starting over again.
It got way too large for the spot.
Okay, so when you're shaping, the simplest thing is to take the natural form that a plant has and do these things. Take out what's dead and diseased.
Always take out the dead and disease.
And always be careful not to rip. Leave the collar and undercut the branch. Your first cut goes under. The second cut goes further out so it cracks off, and then you take the stub off.
Then you go back and be a lot more accurate and have no weight.
No weight.
Worry about ripping. It's the weight. It's the when that branch, so much weight goes, it wants to rip. That undercut keeps that from ripping.
And it broke off clean like you see there in this picture.
And then you could cut it
at the collar and it will heal over. And we write about those things too, so you can look up.
You don't want to do bad cuts.
You want the collar to heal over and to seal, it grows over. Then after you take the dead and disease stuff out, take out the water sprouts and the suckers.
The uglies.
These are suckers. They're coming from the base of the trunk, or sometimes some plants come from the roots. Cut the suckers off. And I dig down and take them off the root.
Go down to the root.
If you do that the first time, or if you sort out one that's been badly suckering into a shrub thicket, after you do it one time, it becomes easier to just keep it. But if you just keep clipping them at the surface, you get a thicker and thicker shrub. You get that hollow ball shrub sitting at ground level. These are water sprouts. They're suckers from the trunk on the main branches. They're growing up rather than out. Those are water sprouts. And you take off water sprouts and suckers. See the water sprouts sticking up from the crabapple? It's the thing I hate most to do. And water sprouts they will grow up and then they'll branch out and they'll become the next layer of the crabapple, which most of us don't want. We don't want to lose the house behind the crabapple.
It gets too dense.
Then you take out crossing wood. Crossing wood leaves one side of a plant, crosses over into another area. So crossing wood would be coming from the center of that the sketch that I've got up there, and that was an actual crabapple. Had a branch that came from a branch that went to the left, and then it went all the way across and was shading out stuff on the right. Take that out. It's a little hard to see, but if you follow the orange line and look, you'll see in the magnolia, it's got a crossing branch going right through everybody else. That's a branch that arose on the left side of the trunk, came up, and then crossed back over. Get rid of the crossing wood.
And you might as well go down and take
the main branch.
You'll have to take some weight off, but
yep. Then after you've done that, step back and look at it and prune to make it look good. It's so much easier when the water sprouts and the suckers and the dead stuff and the crossing stuff's out of the way to say, oh, okay.
You have a shape.
Yeah. And look for the future. You know, you're a gardener. You're going to be around for a while. Sometimes you have to sacrifice things to ask for new plants. I mean, look at the mess that I left. It took 7 years to get it here, but we didn't have to dig up and buy new plants.
It was good 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It took 5.
Okay. If you're using things, if you're doing tight forms, topiary, unnatural shapes, then you're going to have to shear, take hard stubs out, and then make thinning cuts too. So this is a juniper, pom-pom juniper, once a year in August. I clip it, so there it on the left before it's done, on the right after it's done. Sorry, Stephen. There we go. After I shear it, then I clip out the stubs. See, there is greenery on the inside. I need to get the stubs out, some of those hard stubs out, in order to let light reach down in. So on the upper left is before it's cut. On the upper right, I've just sheared it. On the bottom part, it's sheared and thinned. If you look, you can see that it looks browner on the upper right. I've taken out the brown stubs. I've taken a lot out of it, but I've let light in, and that's the only way that's going to keep it growing.
Otherwise, you just have to let it expand.
Get bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. If you want to stimulate new growth, then prune when something is soft. It's called candling on evergreens, and it actually works that way on deciduous plants too. If the new growth is soft, you can cut right through, cut that candle, that soft part of the spruce, in half, and it will live and form a bud at the tip. If I cut in half the brown wood, any place where it's brown, and I cut right through there, I won't get a bud forming there, or unlikely to get a bud forming there. So if you want it, you can get more growth. You can get them to double and stay shorter. They don't you can't keep a plant small forever by candling, because candling, by its definition, is to shorten the growth. And you have to eliminate everything beyond a certain line. So you're not going to stop it from candling. In fact, pinching, candling, is why this happens with arborvitaes. See that branch with the arrow on the left? We've written about this on our website. Is all leaning out one winter. It's because it was a whole separate trunk. When this was just a little bitty sun-kissed arborvitae, they were pinching it all the time, and it formed multiple shoots to where it had a bunch of trunks. And I show in the article how I took one of the trunks out and staked the other one up. You couldn't tell a month later that it had happened. Always keep plants healthy. Clean tools.
Sharp.
Sterilize things with peroxide alcohol or
Sharp.
bleach. Yeah. Stay out of wet weather.
Sharp.
The rhododendron in the background on the corner of the house, it's mounded and about halfway up the window there. That rhododendron might look all right to you, but it had yellow branches in it and was not looking good. And I crawled in and looked underneath it and went, nope, nope, nope. Got to take it out. I cut way back into it. It's got lots of growth coming, and that's good. And that growth is going to come from below the damage. See the weak stuff on the lower right? How weak that branch is, how weak the new branches are. Small foliage, yellow foliage. Where it's stronger down there, it's going to come from below the damage. And the damage here, it might have been physical damage that invited borers in, or the borers may simply have tunneled in. And in there, you can see the little segmented body of the borers chewing their way through the cambium. You need to cut below the damage, get all the damaged wood out. Okay, so this is our first question and answer session now.
Okay, you got 11 questions.
Okay. Oh, and we're going to do something a little different here. Keep on, you keep on talking, and we are going to be able to talk with our hands now and with branches. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is from Kathy Skinner about dwarf thread leaf cypress.
Like gold mops and green mop fall cypresses.
Yep.
And you're trying to keep them small, right?
That's exactly right.
there's an article on our website that shows you in pictures a 5-year progression of bringing fall cypresses that had been sheared back to being feathery again. But the way that they're going to work is the same way that you're going to work with you. Same thing. So this is my demonstration. I know it's not a fall cypress, but you're going to do the same thing. You're going to look at the growth rate, and you're going to go back to places where that growth comes from and clip that branch all the way back, leaving then the feathery stuff coming from further down.
Hold it up.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm going to take that long piece out. I've still got feathery stuff. I might take 2 long pieces out. And on a fall cypress, now I've still got that nice feathery part, but I've lost a lot of height, a lot of the stuff sticking out. And on a fall cypress, as long as there is growth coming down at the bottom, tiny twigs, see the twiglets coming at the base of the branch?
I have to push a little bit closer.
Right down here, you've got a twiglet still alive down here and here. Those will grow, and rapidly. You see how fast fall cypresses, those mop fall cypresses grow, sometimes 8 inches a year. So at some point, I can cut some things back all the way to here, leaving a branch next to it to be the nice feathery look, and let this develop. So you might, when you're reclaiming a fall cypress that's been sheared for too long, you might have to cut some branches back in, and you'll see in the article that's on the website, and I think a little bit later I show it here, or a piece of it here, you'll be able to see through the plant for a while, but just for a while. I brought all kinds of guys.
Oh yeah, there's a couple spiders rolling around. It's
what else?
Going to be interesting vacuuming this.
Okay, so the next question, text that the next question was asked in was when you were talking about needle drop and knowing when the needles drop.
Yes.
So Michelle asked, after the needles have dropped, does that mean new growth will not come out from that wood?
On the PJ Facts, on pine, juniper, firs, arborvitaes, cypress, and spruces, once the needles fall off that part is not going to generate new growth. Most of the time. Every once in a while, they'll do that.
Never say never.
Never say never.
Never assume.
I've seen a very
Plants
healthy
do.
juniper and spruce regularly sprout out from places that one man who kept trying to keep his spruce in a nice little ice cream cone shape on top of a trunk. That darn thing kept sprouting, even from big branches he took off. I think just because, you know.
Normally they don't. I mean, really.
Yeah, normally they don't. Once the needles fall, that's it. Time out.
Okay, the next question is from Nancy, and this was when you were showing a plant that that you had pruned very heavily in like 2012, and then we're showing it.
There was a pyramidal yew.
Yeah, she wanted to know what was the name of the plant.
It's a pyramidal yew. It's a Japanese yew. It's Taxus cuspidata. I hope I have that right. But it's the Japanese pyramidal tree yew. They don't generate as well from older wood. Yews you can cut back to bare wood and they'll generally sprout out. So you do have to let those guys progress like I showed it there.
Okay. Can you cut beautyberry to the ground every spring?
Every single spring. Stupid plant. You can just cut it down and it grows back. This
year it came up and it just went.
It was so cold.
And then it came up again, and now we've got 2 layers of
not only 2 layers, but every one that I have seen is 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. They're enormous this year.
Can you shear 9 barks?
You can shear 9 barks, yes. You can shear anything.
Anything can be sheared. We've seen it.
But because they grow so fast, it's difficult to keep them sheared and to keep them healthy. So if you are going to shear them into a shape of a particular kind, make sure you thin them. They need to have, anything that grows that fast needs to have new growth. I do show a little bit later keeping a 9 bark smaller with 2 prunings here.
Okay. Yeah. If you cut a terminal bud, what happens to the plant? Will it grow buds elsewhere, or have you damaged the plant?
Well, you always damage a plant when you cut or take wood, take it off. But if you do this on relatively small wood, the plant has enough energy to seal that damage over. Let's do how about you hold up the...
Which one? This one?
We'll do a leatherleaf viburnum. Here's another one of these crazy plants like 9 bark. This is a leatherleaf viburnum that I just reclaimed, and I'll show you pictures of a little bit later. This is the whole branch that I took out all the way to the ground.
Yeah. So it was...
Yeah, so basically for 3.5, 4 feet, it had no branches on it, no leaves on it, because it was growing up in a crowd of other branches. And I want the leaves to be all the way down here, and I want the whole plant to be only about this tall. You can kind of see at the top here where I've cut it before, and it's branched out into 2 branches. And I did that when it was small. I nipped its tip when it was little. That part died back, and it's got 2 branches. So it sealed off the damage. So it does form a new bud. It does seal off the damage, and the sooner you do that in its life, the better. Now I can shorten this. I want you to put it back in the vertical position there. I could do this. I could say, all right, I'll just make you shorter by 1 year's growth is 2 feet or so on this guy. So I've just shortened it by about 18 inches. And I could do that, but this one was so thick and so big that I went down into it like I did the 9 barks and took some branches all the way out. You can see that way at the bottom, it's got a bunch of dead twigs on it that tried to grow, but it was so shaded down there by everything else that was growing that that's all it could do. Give it time. You can throw that guy down on the ground over there. I think he's done. Give it time, and it does this. We have our whole hallway full of branches here. It looks like the lineup for a talk show. So given time, it does this. You can, where it was clipped one time, and it grew up, and this became dominant, and it's grown out from there, and it's grown new buds, so it just keeps on going. This one also is a little bit black. The wood is black, and that's because it's in so much shade that any insects that are in there, like the
elm leaf beetle,
viburnum leaf beetle, all their excrement that falls on the branch forms sooty mold, and that makes it even shadier. All right, next question.
Okay, Anna Wajilia, the question answerer asked, she took out the oldest wood in the spring, and now she has a flush of growth at the bottom of the plant. She's wondering if she did it wrong and should she correct it. Now, how can she correct it?
Candy, the Weigelia down there?
Yeah.
No, you didn't do it wrong. On a Weigelia, that's pretty much what you want to do. They grow very fast. It's a member of the honeysuckle family. So here's a Weigelia branch. Their tendency is to grow very quickly in the spring. You can see all of this whole straight growth up to here. That's one spring, it took off. The side branches are what are going to bloom on those. And so here you see side branches that have flower buds, seed pods on them. After it blooms, it's going to create new growth at the bottom, which will bloom later. So when we prune Weigelia, we let it bloom, and then we cut this branch out. You want to take that branch out, Steve, with the loppers?
Which one?
This guy out. No, one more up. Go. And when we took that out, right after it finished blooming, it wasn't this elongated, and it didn't have this, see that white piece, that piece without bloom sticking up?
This one.
Yeah, there's next year's bloom, but that same thing would grow from the bottom. So when I cut it back, those would grow from down here and be shorter blooming pieces next spring, and we'd get more bloom longer because there's more bloom coming. There's new growth coming from here, but I want the long stuff. So I cut them twice a year. In the springtime, we go in and we take out old ratty wood, just clip it out at the bottom, like out that 9 bark, and get rid of it. And then after it blooms, we reach in and take some branches all the way down so that there's light reaching in to get those nice straight pieces that'll bloom next year. So you didn't do it wrong. It's really difficult to kill the Weigelia. Look on our website, and we've got pictures of the Weigelia chopped all the way back, trunks as big around as my arm, and just sprouting out all over the place.
Okay. Okay, we need, Carolyn needs to prune a weeping crabapple. She's concerned about apple scab. Should she prune it now or in the winter?
Apple scab is a disease of the leaves. It does not affect the wood. So you can definitely prune it now. Scab removes some leaves from the plant partway through the year, so it reduces the amount of energy that the plant has because it has less leaves on it. So if it has scab, a real big problem with scab, cutting it now can actually help it a little bit because you're removing wood that doesn't have anything to support it. But you're probably better off, I think you're better off with crab apples to prune during a winter thaw or right before they start growing in the spring, like the apple orchardist would, so that you can thin it all out. You can take lots of wood out and make it so that, what did Mr. Masters?
If I didn't.
If I'm not afraid, if I'm not scared when I go out into the orchard by how many branches are on the ground, if I don't go, oh my gosh, too many branches, then they haven't taken enough out.
Yes.
And the old wisdom is that you should be able to have a robin fly through your crabapple without hindrance. So do it in the winter, you open up space, that robin can fly through, air can go through, and you don't get so much scab the next year.
Okay. Can you cut one side of a plant facing the neighbor and let the other side go naturally?
Sure, yes. Do the two-face routine. A lot of people do that with hedges along the side. In fact, yesterday where I was working, we have our side pruned, and the other side, the neighbor was never interested in it at all, would let me come over once in a while and do some really, what do you call that, triage, get the worst stuff out. But now a new person has bought the house and they are interested, and we have to reclaim the other side of the hedge.
Okay, so Stacy has a white morning star magnolia that is taller than the gutters. She'd like to prune it back. However, the whole top is on one branch, about 4 inches in diameter. If I take that branch out, will another branch take over as the leader?
Yes. With a magnolias do get diseases of the wood, several different diseases of the wood, bacterial and fungal. You definitely don't want to prune when it's wet, and you should prune when it's younger. So if you've got a 4-inch diameter trunk, I would be very much inclined to follow that trunk all the way back to where it comes from and make one cut and allow other branches to form, to develop, and they will. It'll sprout out. And I would probably do it before it starts growing in the spring rather than doing it now. Yeah, Stacy, you have to get these things when they first get to the gutter. Don't let them get past the gutter. You start pruning when it reaches the height you want it to be. We all do it.
Well, everybody does.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lizzie has an American plum that's very dense with leaves. Where does she start pruning?
The American plum is another one that you don't want to mess with when it's wet because it does get diseases of the wood. There's a couple of different fungal problems that it gets and one bacterial problem. So don't do it when it's wet, but you can do it now. And the first thing that I do with those is I go in and I take out the water sprouts and the crossing wood because they are notorious for being a mess, for being the slob of the plant world. So first, don't think about what shape it's going to be, what size it's going to be. Go in and take out dead stuff, take out crossing wood, take out the suckers that are coming straight up off of horizontal branches, and then step back and look at it and sort it out the way we're going to do in part 2.
Which we should start.
Yeah, which we should start.
Okay, do you want me to, just a quick question here. Should I hold on to these other questions from this?
Yeah,
section?
we'll hang on to the questions. Any that we don't get to in this session, I'll put into a chat transcript and we post that where our webinar information, our handouts and outline material is.
Okay, so I got it. So, okay.
Yeah, and we'll be able to download that chat too.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Share for a minute.
Share. Yeah. Okay. So here we are back at questions. You need to give me control of the screen. There you go. So wasn't it nicer looking at us waving our hands around than looking at Steve's beautiful pictures? I miss his pictures, but that's all then for chapter 1 of Pruning Evergreens, Shrubs and Trees. We're glad you could come and join us for this. And I hope that you'll stick around. We do post these things on our YouTube channel and we post them in pieces so people don't have to sit for a long time looking for the part they want. It is copyrighted material. Although we want you to share it with people, it represents decades of work on our part, and we'd like to know if you're going to use it for an organized group. So please contact us if you're going to do that.